Have to get my timer ready. Okay. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. I'm doing something different today in that I am staying stationary, and I'm reading off of a prepared manuscript, so please bear with me, as this is not my usual thing. When I was asked to be one of the speakers at this retreat, I was delighted at the prospect. But eventually, as time wore on, I was at a loss. I didn't know what I would present on. Try as I might, no amount of prayer, head-scratching, or pipe-lit walks had revealed to me what I should speak about. It was my wonderful wife who first asked the question, "What about the Internet?" Of course! How had I not seen it sooner? Without fail, the thing that gets brought up at every opportunity is orthodoxy on the Internet. Young and old, catechumen and seasoned vet, everyone is wondering, what does the priest watch, read, and listen to? At last I had chosen my topic. But how does one present on a subject as diverse and problematic as the Internet? At best, this will be a snapshot, a still life of us here in the spring of 2025, finding our way through the digital wilderness. Everything was different 6 months before, and 2 weeks from now, nothing will ever be the same again. It's precisely this elusiveness, this capacity to shapeshift and transform, that ensures the Internet will always need the church to translate and interpret. Today, I hope to give you some basic skills that will see you through this digital age and into the next. Here we go. Orthodoxy is North America's best-kept secret. How many of you have heard these words uttered in the past 5 years? Orthodoxy is America's best-kept secret. Yeah, some of you? Okay. For many of us who are not lucky enough to be born into the Orthodox Church, we resonate with this. How can something that is now so central to our existence have remained hidden from us in plain sight? We are like the man who finds a great treasure hidden in a field. Many of us have sold all that we have to acquire that field and then begin excavating this treasure. I am only one of many, many such stories. After a decade of faithful service in the Evangelical Free Church and 4 years of undergraduate study at an accredited Bible institution, I had graduated and was ready to take on the challenge of ministry. I had my entire life's path set for me. 6 months later, I was standing in the Divine Liturgy at St. Herman of Alaska Orthodox Church in Langley, British Columbia, not knowing whether I was on earth or in heaven. I had found the treasure and faced the reality of what I knew had to happen, giving up all that I had in order to attain it. All of this happened in the year 2007. At the same time, a little tech startup called YouTube had just reached internet ascendancy, consuming as much bandwidth in its second year of operation as the entire internet had in the year 2000. Up until this point, information had been shared in dark backroom message boards and AngelFire or GeoCities websites in text form. If you were lucky, there were some pictures, or maybe even a GIF, and yes, it is pronounced GIF, to go along with it. The world was tuning in to the online video revolution, but the Orthodox Church was not yet present in the mix. I'm sure that I'll get at least a few people arguing that no, in fact, my favorite Orthodox YouTuber was there from the beginning. That may be true, and I won't argue the point. However, speaking for myself and most of the people that I knew at the time, those worlds had yet to collide. We were too busy watching cute cat videos, Charlie the Unicorn, and Harry Potter's Puppet Pals by day. Oh man, you just all dated yourselves. And burning the midnight oil, reading Frederica Matthews Green and Father Peter Gilchrist at night. It wasn't long, however, until these two seemingly disparate forces combined to create a truly unprecedented phenomenon. According to studies, which as studies do vary slightly to wildly, the number of Orthodox Christians in America has exploded from 675,000 in 2020 to just under 6 million in 2024. As many as 50% of all attendees at North American Antiochian churches in 2024 are converts to the faith, and approximately 20% of those have come in since the beginning of the pandemic. But why now? How have the masses located the pearl of great price, that thing for which many of us remained hidden and elusive for years, even decades? Was it merely the threat of sickness and death brought on by the pandemic, which catapulted Orthodox Christianity into the North American limelight? Or is there something else at play? I would argue that for the majority, the Internet has played a significant role in the discovery of and cleaving to the Orthodox faith. As younger millennials and older Gen Z, our social media feeds are full to the brim with religious content fueled by political unrest, ideological warfare, and conspiracy theories. The Internet has become the primary way in which we consume the world. A justifiable and unavoidable corollary to this, then, is that the Internet is the primary way in which many of us consume and interact with our faith and the church. This begs several questions. Is this healthy? Can we, as the body of Christ, be nourished and upheld by the influence of a vocal few on the Internet? Is there profit to be found amidst the myriad of voices vying for our attentions, likes, and views? As Orthodox Christians living in our postmodern world, these are questions that we ignore at our own peril, and indeed the answers will shape the fabric of our life in Christ for generations to come. In our discussion of orthodoxy and the Internet today, I will attempt to draw from many sources, and I believe that it's vital to be transparent and honest with you about the information I'm using and the way in which it's being used. I will be drawing from books, statistics, blogs, websites, YouTube, Instagram, and the collected histories of the Internet found online. But more than anything, I want to incorporate the personal experiences of myself and others who I've encountered in the nearly 20 years I've spent as an Orthodox Christian. I do this in order to push back against the juggernaut that is the recent influence of online sources and recenter the conversation where I believe it belongs, within the local parish. In discussing with my spiritual father about the character of sources of orthodoxy present in the post-structuralist world and our consumption of them, an important question arose. What is the purpose of our search? For many, this question is not asked because the answer is merely assumed. But again, I stress that we remain ignorant of our methods and motivations at our own peril. Reading a book is a vastly different activity from watching a video on a computer or a phone. And these are different from scrolling a Facebook or Instagram feed. And all of this is very far removed from what happens when we click on the little speech bubble icon that takes us to that dreaded 21st century phenomenon, the comment section. When we ask ourselves what our motivations are, we can break down the positive answers into three distinct categories: information, inspiration, and entertainment. It's easy to cast judgment on certain of these and rank them in a self-imposed system of importance. This, however, is driven by pride and ego. Correctly, as Neil Postman famously declared in his book of the same title, we in North America are amusing ourselves to death. But I would argue that these three, in turn, have their proper place in life, and just as with anything else in the Christian struggle, can exist in a balanced and appropriate structure. And as a sidebar here to the conversation, I will be mentioning names and sources in this talk as illustrative points. I will not be making proclamations on who is right or wrong, what is good and bad, and what one should stay away from by name. Sorry, if you wanted my hot takes, you'll have to take me out for a beer after. I will be discussing the basic and general characteristics of information without casting judgment or aspersions on anyone. However, if you want my hit list and my recommendations, I'd be more than happy to provide a list to you privately after the presentation. I recently reread a beautifully written book by Orthodox poet and scholar Scott Cairns. The book is called A Short Trip to the Edge and is a spiritual travelogue of his first trip to Mount Athos. I say beautiful because of the language that he uses. The fact that he is a poet, and a very good one, cannot be ignored, but also because he weaves all three of these categories together imperceptibly throughout the work. Complete with a glossary at the back, he is not shy to explain to the uninitiated terms like archimandrite, simantron, and trapeza. He is providing information. When you read this book as a newcomer, you are invited into a world that has its own vocabulary and way of being. You're learning something new and exciting. At the same time, in his poetic lilt, he paints incredible pictures of fortresses of prayer that cling to the misty cliffs and rocky precipices of Athos, the beauty of the flora, the majestic and unpredictable weather, the daily life consisting of food, drink, hospitality, and of course, prayer, the midnight vigils that last for hours into the gentle gloaming of dawn. In short, the book is incredibly inspiring. Actually, few books have lit the fire of desire for prayer within me more than this one has. However, throughout his journeys in Thessaloniki to the port cities of Daphne, the Ouranopolis, complete with his encounters with monks, priests, fellow pilgrims, political officials, and other interesting characters, your attention is rapt and undivided. I would be lying if I said that while reading this book, I was not entertained. In less than 200 pages, Mr. Cairns informs, inspires, and entertains. I would call this book a success, both in its form and its function, and I would recommend it to anyone, both beginner and experienced. This is the balance that I like to see in a source of material for the Orthodox life. To be certain, A Short Trip to the Edge is not alone in receiving this honor from me. Dozens of books follow the same format. Many of the lives of saints that are put out by publishing houses like the Brotherhood of St. Herman of Alaska or Conciliar Press and others have similar layouts. A preliminary section containing the life of a saint, and then an adjoining section that outlines teachings and sayings of that same saint. Again, in these books, all three categories are well represented. And I know that several of you right now are thinking, why? We came to hear a lecture about the internet. Stop talking about books. I know. Part of this is of an impure motivation on my part, in that I want to commend to you the act of reading itself. Something happens when we quiet ourselves and carve out an extended period of time in order to take something in. We quiet ourselves, and it becomes in itself a sacrifice of time, a prayerful action. This doesn't happen in the same way when we collapse into bed, exhausted at the end of a day, accompanied by the cold blue glare of a smartphone. We scroll through endless one-minute clips designed to completely dominate and destroy our attention span, and then vacate our minds the second the next one begins. We gain relatively little, and in the process our attention spans and our capacity for silence and contemplation remain stunted at best and shrivel away at worst. And the biggest problem is, most of these clips, shorts, reels, tweets, and other weird words for videos, most decidedly do not follow the threefold rule of content character. They are lopsided, and as a result, they are dangerously incomplete. Which brings us to our next topic. Having gone over the basics of the character of Orthodox content and our purpose in consuming it, we move to that monolithic figure in Internet Orthodoxy, YouTube. With the advent of YouTube, the proverbial Wild West has been opened for settlement, and dozens, if not hundreds, of well-intentioned and zealous pioneers have set out into the wild blue yonder to tame the wilderness of the Internet and plant the flag of Orthodox Christianity far and wide. This in itself is laudable. Wherever there are people, there is the need for the grace and truth of Jesus Christ, his healing, his light, and his grace. Just as Father Herman and his company of monks came to North America and St. Nicholas to Japan, these intrepid folks venture into unknown territory, broadcast into the bedrooms and daily commutes of millions of people all over the world, the mission field has changed and broadened, and the challenges remain no less daunting. We are sharing the pearl of great price, and people are responding. This is an especially compelling vision of the church to those who cannot participate in regular church life, whether they be shut-ins, shift workers, or rural people who have no access to an Orthodox church in their area. Services are live streamed and catechism has gone online, making learning and participating even easier than ever. But there must be a realization that this is just a beginning. Famously spoken, Immanuel Kant was correct when he said, "Experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is merely intellectual play." Gathering the knowledge of Orthodox Christianity is useless unless that knowledge is put into action and utilized. We remain stunted creatures, content to play in the intellectual sandbox, using the canons, rules, and theological statements of the Church as our playthings. I can think of nothing more disingenuous, deceiving, and frankly dangerous than this. We see it all the time. People on the internet for whom cyberspace becomes their church. They preach from behind the iconostasis of a computer screen, celebrating a false communion with millions on the altar of their own pride. Never trust someone who says to you, "Get off the internet and say your prayers or go to church," while out of the other side of their mouth comes the now well-worn phrase, "Please like, share, and subscribe for more content." They are not giving you the church. They are selling you their own private version of it. While the faults of this particular medium can't be laid upon any one person or group of people, they do bear the burden of an entire cohort that refuses to wed the practical and ascetic work of the church with its intellectual and theological inheritance. One thing that I encourage my parishioners to do is visit monasteries as often as they can. I share this with Father Vladimir, this opinion. I myself go once a year for retreat for a week to a small hermitage in the mountains of British Columbia. This is not to seek out an elder who can read my thoughts and guide me on the one path that God has foreordained for my life. That sounds to me more like a kung fu movie. And it's a attendant world. Now, don't get me wrong, I love monks, I love kung fu, but it's a bit unrealistic. I go to the monastery because it changes me. The rhythm of prayer, the shared work, the stillness and the silence, and of course, the gentle, loving kindness that monastics are famous for speaks to my heart and inflames it with love for Christ and love for my brothers and sisters. For months after my visit, the sweet fragrance of my time in this holy place clings to me as a reminder of how I should be, even in the world. I spend the next 51 weeks of the year longing to return and to take in that sweetness. To be perfectly honest, if we're doing things correctly, our parishes should have the same effect on visitors and on us too. But all too often, people miss the real point of the monastic visit. They focus on the person of the elder and his advice for them. More on that later. And since, rightly so, they crave guidance from loving and spiritual people, and since many cannot afford to or find the time to go and visit, they search it out on the internet. Internet Explorer has replaced the Axion Estin, which is the ferry that takes you from mainland Greece to Athos. And YouTube becomes the new holy mountain. Here we encounter our holy elders who preside in unquestioned authority and who hand out life advice freely to all of those that flock their digital cells. Beware the digital elder. What they lack in context, they make up for in severity and surety. Please excuse the inflammatory nature of the heading for this section. My purpose is not to shock or scandalize any of you, but to bring to remembrance our high calling given by Christ. For many of us, we are given over to the ways of this world, and part of that is how we relate to one another. Marriage occupies a large portion of that interrelation. The vast majority of people in North America eventually marry and live a life of sacrifice within that particular God-honored framework. However, other paths exist as well. We have those who live in celibacy, consecrating their virginity to the service of God and His church in the world. And then we have monastics, those that choose to die to the world and to themselves in a brotherhood or sisterhood of like-minded people with whom they work out their salvation. An interesting thing to note is that this balance and statistical breakdown of human relationships is not reflected in the online Orthodox experience. A cursory glance through the Instagram search function with the heading Orthodoxy yields surprising results, or maybe not so surprising results. Videos and pictures of graying, long-bearded monks clad in the imposing great schema of the church, accompanied by somber Byzantine chant, overlaid by the words, "Give me orthodoxy or give me death," dominate the search field. I don't think that I need to tell you that this is not my day-to-day experience of the church, and I would venture to guess neither is it yours. And yet we continue to delude ourselves, either that we are more spiritual than we really are, in that this imagery somehow mirrors a spiritual reality that we invisibly live, or we deceive others outside the church that this is actually what life is like in our churches. And you'll see this picture here. I posted it to prove myself wrong, because after I wrote this vitriolic thing about how I'm frustrated about monasticism's dominance, I remembered, oh right, alternatives do exist. There are stay-at-home moms and other folks that are posting, but their voices are very quiet, right? Something to keep in mind. Yes, she has a page on Instagram. It's called The Ascetic Life of Motherhood. Look it up. It's really good stuff. What drives this need to project an image of spiritual superiority clad in the trappings of monasticism? Do we use the words of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 to justify the opinion that monasticism far outstrips married life in holiness and effectiveness? I would caution anyone who lifts up monasticism to the detriment of married life, as both are hallowed and sanctified by the church. Let us not forget that both are sacramental realities, and as such communicate the ineffable grace of Christ to those that participate in them. It is unrealistic to expect married people to live as monastics, just as it is completely ridiculous to expect monastics to participate in the romantic and sexual unions that married people enjoy and utilize in their own relationships. And yet this is what we do. It becomes an untenable one-way street where we demand those who have left father and mother to cleave to one another in a bond of love and self-sacrifice that is for their salvation, to abandon this good work. To project the framework of monasticism on married people is to cast a vision of an unattainable reality, completely devaluing a holy enterprise and utterly demoralizing and destabilizing what was, at the outset, perfectly acceptable and even commendable. This is where many run into trouble on the internet. Stories abound online of elders who have counseled their spiritual children to leave their spouses and marriages and join the monastic life. Others promote a vision of family life where homes are to be run as small monasteries, waking the children at midnight for prayer, and where coming together as husband and wife is looked down upon as something sinful and unclean, preferring monastic precision in chastity. What fuels this desire for correctness? Many new Orthodox Christians, catechumens, and inquirers are terrified of committing the unforgivable sin. And in the modern Orthodox internet landscape, these unforgivable sins have proliferated and abound. I have been asked numerous times questions like, "Father, what kind of car should we buy?" Or, "Father, is it all right if my wife and I go on vacation next month?" Or, "Father, is it a sin to pray at the table with my Protestant relatives at Christmas dinner?" It's ridiculous. The shadow of certain strains of monasticism have cast over the internet has reached far into our lives and is beginning to warp and twist the ways in which we look at the world. The desire to be correct far outstrips the desire for Christ and his church. This sounds insane, and it is. Just because something is more strict and more austere does not make it more correct. I want to repeat that for you. Just because something is more strict and more austere does not make it more correct. Father Seraphim Rose speaks about the problem of hypercorrectness in a talk he gave on Old Calendar Zealotism in 1979. This can be found on YouTube, and it is well worth a watch. If you want the link to this, talk to me after. I will share it with you. It's amazing. Starting off with a condemnation of ecumenism in its more extreme forms, he then launches into a critique of what he brilliantly labels the correctness disease. He tells the story of a monk who has walked the path of old calendarism to its end, breaking off with certain old calendar groups from the Orthodox Church, then breaking off from those old calendar groups into more obscure groups, and so on, and so on, and so on. Father Seraphim asks the monk, "How many people are you in communion with?" The monk replies, 10 people and 1 priest. Not even a bishop. 10 people and 1 priest. When Father Seraphim then asks, "What will you do when that priest dies?" the monk simply replies, "I don't know. I just don't know." What a terrifying prospect, to be cut off from the source of life by our own definition of what it is to be correct. He then goes on to drop an absolute bombshell of a quote, which is up on the screen. "With our calculating, rationalistic Western minds, it is very easy to think that we are being zealous and strict when actually we are chiefly indulging our passion for self-righteousness." Keep in mind that Father Seraphim Rose is one of these imposing figures, a man who through his genius, piety, austerity of life, and rigor has won the hearts of millions of Orthodox Christians around the world, so much so that he has become, most assuredly against his will, a poster child for those who would espouse the same kind of teaching that in this video he decries. In this case, it's not the source that is the problem, but the interpretation and the application. The forest is missed for the trees, and the point is completely lost. If the strictest and most austere solution is the correct one, then we have no choice but to adopt a maladaptive framework for our repentance. And so, in the quest to become as correct as possible, all other pathways of sanctity are bypassed, and we end up play-acting as monks, worshiping the golden calf of false piety that we have set up in our minds. In order to be correct, we must live as monks, something that we simply are not. We end up, as Father Seraphim says, indulging our passion for self-righteousness. This is shameful, and it should be guarded against at all costs, because in it we gain no sanctity, but rather lose our souls. We cut ourselves off from the real sources of life in our lives that Christ has given to us, and instead, as C.S. Lewis famously said, we content ourselves to sit and play in the mud. Please indulge me for a moment while I assure you that I have no problems with monasticism. Indeed, without the prayers of righteous monks and nuns everywhere, the world itself would cease to turn. They are the lifeblood of the church, but we must make every effort to guard ourselves against the temptation to solve every lay problem with a monastic solution. We must stop living in spiritual fantasy and fully conform confront the situation that lies before us. So then, with all this being said, where can we as Orthodox Christians go for that much-needed spiritual advice? How do we wisely and appropriately seek counsel in matters pertaining to faith and life? When searching for a guide to the spiritual life, there are many things to consider. We must look at a person's authority, at their experience, and at their intent. But far and above all of these lies something else that is often not taken into consideration. The answer lies not in rank or station, but in relationship. There is a beautiful story from the sayings of the Desert Fathers where Abba Pimen asks Abba Joseph a question. What should I do when the passions attack me? Should I resist them or let them enter? The old man said to him, let them enter and fight against them. So he returned to Scetis where he remained. Now someone from Thebes came to Scetis and said to the brethren, I asked Abba Joseph if I ought to resist the passions when they approach or let them enter, and he replied that I ought not to allow them even the smallest entry, but cut them off immediately. When Abba Pimen learned that Abba Joseph had spoken to the brother from Thebes in this way, he got up and went to see him at Panephysis and said, Abba, I consulted you about my thoughts, and you have said one thing to me and another to the Theban. The old man said to him, do you not know that I love you? He said, yes. And did you not say to me, speak to me as you speak to yourself? That is right. Then the old man said, truly, if the passions enter you and you fight against them, you become stronger. I spoke to you as to myself, but there are others who cannot profit in this way if the passions approach them, and so they must cut them off immediately. No doubt, Abba Joseph was a man who had attained mastery in the spiritual life. This is plainly to be seen in that many of the brothers would travel to see him from Thebes, from Scetis, and other far-off places of the Nitrian desert and beyond. The Desert Fathers are a primary source and a guide for many of us regarding the wisdom of the Church. And this story is an excellent sampling of Desert Father wisdom in that it addresses two main concerns of spiritual guidance. The first is hidden in the question that Abba Joseph poses to Abba Pimen in their second exchange. Do you know that I love you? With this question, Abba Joseph both disarms Abba Pimen's suspicions and reassures him of the character of their relationship. Pimen is Abba Joseph's spiritual child, and that parent-child relationship is one of trust, love, and obedience. We see this in Abba Pimen's complete acceptance of Abba Joseph's guidance and how to fend off the passions when they attack. Even though Abba Joseph gives hard advice to let the passions in and fight with them, Abba Pimen knows that though this might be a hard thing to do, it's the right thing for him because the elder loves him and he, in turn, loves the elder. So love is the defining factor. But what of the other monk, the one who came to Abba Joseph asking the same question, but receiving a very different answer? This is the other part of this particular word. Abba Joseph assures Pimen that there is no discrepancy here, but that the goal for both monks is one and the same, even though the guidance may vary. I spoke to you as to myself, but there are others who cannot profit in this way. There is an understanding by Abba Joseph that not all medicines are appropriate for all patients. St. Gregory the Dialogist, Pope of Rome, has something very similar to say in his book of Pastoral Rule. Indeed, long before us, Gregory Nazianzus of blessed memory taught that one and the same exhortation is not suited for everyone, because not everyone shares the same quality of character. For example, what often helps some people will cause harm in others, just as herbs that are nutritious to some animals will kill others, or the way that gentle hissing will calm a horse but excite a puppy. Likewise, the medicine that cures one man can kill a young child. Therefore, the discourse of the teacher should be adapted to the character of his audience, so that it can address the specific needs of each individual and yet never shrink from the art of communal edification. Both Gregory Nazianzus and St. Gregory the Great understand this simple maxim. Spiritual care is a difficult art because spiritual advice is not a one-size-fits-all enterprise. Abba Joseph knew this too because he had the spiritual insight and the depth of relationship to receive the same question and offer completely different courses of action. Just as a doctor may see two patients with the same exact symptoms, he knows that he must take into account the current state of affairs, their past histories, and the constitution of both. A simple infection may be successfully treated in one patient by a course of antibiotics, but in the other would be killed almost instantly because of a serious penicillin allergy. The doctor must read the chart. He must probe and ask questions, and he must foster a relationship that goes beyond the preliminary visit. That's the reason we have family doctors. The real value in the therapeutic encounter comes in the relationship, and the accuracy with which we are treated is a direct result of one soul continually bearing itself in the presence of another. Here, I would like to say a few words on the title, Spiritual Father. In the current internet environment, there are many that have been casting about in search of a guide, a teacher, someone who can lead them on the path to salvation. They long to give themselves over to someone that can tell them where to go and what to do. This is a good thing, unless it's Jordan Peterson. Don't do that, okay? Being obedient fosters humility, and trusting in those that have been put over us in positions of authority can bear excellent spiritual fruit. But we must be wary of those that style themselves in this way, because it can be perilous to us when we entrust our souls to those that have no business caring for them. Here I would like to tell you two stories from my own personal walk that I hope can help all of you in this search. The first is from recent history, after I moved from northern Saskatchewan to Edmonton. I had several encounters with people I met here who were engaged in this search for spiritual guidance, and the question kept popping up, will you be my spiritual father? I couldn't place the difficulty, but this question made me squirm in my seat. My immediate and reflexive answer was no. But still, some persisted, and so I began to consider the role and character of the spiritual father. I later began to see that answering no and then walking away was callous and incorrect. A better answer would have been maybe, but don't call me that, at least not to my face. You see, many will not get to go to a monastery. Many will never have an encounter with a clairvoyant elder on the mountainsides of Romania or Mount Athos or even Arizona. They have been put in the places that they are with the help that has been given to them. My unwillingness to give them what I can is not an excuse for me to stay a spiritually stunted man. I am being called to cultivate my own life in Christ so that when I am in a situation where someone needs guidance, I can give it, or rather, I will have purified myself to such an extent that Christ can give it through me. And so I have proceeded in this way, but with certain provisions. The first, and please pay attention to these because I'm sure all of you will be in this position one day. To be someone's spiritual child, you must be in regular communication with them. Remember that the doctor and the patient, you need to update your chart regularly so that the doctor can treat you properly. This communication can be remote, but it should include confession. This is the Church's ultimate diagnostic tool. That doesn't mean that anyone you confess to is your spiritual father, but it does mean that you should be confessing to your spiritual father. Another caveat is that you must do your best to be obedient to your spiritual father. As a priest, I have no interest in pushing a rock uphill for eternity. My heavenly patron is St. Tikhon of Moscow, not Sisyphus of Ephesus. As a teacher, I need teachable people. Consider this. If you have asked someone to be your spiritual father and they have declined, perhaps it is because they can see you have an unteachable spirit. As someone's spiritual father, I bear an immense responsibility for their soul. One of the unfair parts of pastoral care is that we bear responsibility but have very, very little control. This is a key factor in recognizing spiritual abuse. If someone is trying to control you, more than likely you are in an unhealthy and unbalanced relationship. Your spiritual father may give you penance or homework or projects to do in spiritual life, but if he is controlling you, get out. This is the peril of the internet. No one knows you, no one sees you, and no one can truly understand your situation. They have no responsibility to anyone for what they do or say, and yet many claim outrageous authority. Control is their end game, and you become the pawn. The second story I want to tell you comes from my last trip to the monastery. A year prior to that trip, I had been struggling due to some serious mental health issues, and I had taken up praying matins every morning to cope. And it worked. Praying more and praying every day made my days better and gave shape to an otherwise shapeless existence. In fact, praying matins was so easy, I began to pray vespers every night as well. All of this felt effortless. I was praying more than I ever had before, and I was feeling great about it. As I sat down with one of the monks at the monastery, I had a burning question. What should my prayer rule look like? I knew that if I wanted to grow, I needed guidance, not a self-imposed prayer rule. So I asked. The monk asked me what my current rule was, and swelling with pride, I laid everything out on the table. My depression, my prayer, my miraculous recovery, and my desire to accomplish even more. Without so much as a raised eyebrow, he said, "Oh, that's very good, Father. I want you to add this prayer. Pray it every day without fail. Wake up in the morning, light your lampada, and say the prayer." And it wasn't the Jesus prayer, but it was about the same length. It was very short. "That's it?" I asked, trying to hide my disappointment. "That's all," he said. So I took the advice home with me. I began inserting the prayer into my rule, and something surprising happened. I lost the ability to pray altogether. Some days I would sleep late. Some days I would wake up and be consumed with torpor and hopelessness. And some days I would make excuses, any excuse, not to pray. In short, in my attempt to be obedient to my guide, the edifice of the prideful prayer I had built crumbled. I realized that I had been praying for me. I was doing it to accomplish something, to be better, to feel a certain way about myself. I had become completely misguided, and the old adage had come true. He who listens to himself has a fool for a guide. That was the moment I knew that this monk was my spiritual father. I had a feeling, but I didn't acknowledge it, mostly for the above-mentioned reasons. But now I knew. My obedience in this one thing exposed my disobedience in countless others. And through this, I was able to begin building a real house of prayer on a solid foundation of humility and obedience. And trust me, this house of prayer is very small. Much, much smaller than the one I had built before. Why do I tell you all of this about my life? I do it because it's important for you to know deep within your hearts that you will never get something like this off of the internet. But you may find it when you go out for a beer or a coffee with your priest. In the words of another of the fathers at the same monastery, and this is speaking to me, if God can speak through Balaam's ass, then he can use you. I said thank you, but I wasn't sure if I should or not. And this is not to say that good things can't be found online. But just because 1 out of 100 fish in the East River is good to eat doesn't mean that I'm about to get my pole and hook. Be careful of who you encounter online. Are they teaching you the truth, or are they on the hunt for disciples? Listen to what they say. Does it come from a place of love for you and humility before God? Or is it grasping at an authority that doesn't belong to them? Trust the people who are around you, who care for you, who feed you regularly, and who know who you are and where it is you've come from. Chances are they'll be the best and most qualified to give you what you need when you need it. Oh, sorry. Please like, share, and subscribe. By the way, this was from an interview that I begrudgingly did for someone, and then they did this to me. We talked about toll houses for about 2 minutes out of a 1-hour interview, and this is the thumbnail for the video on YouTube. So just beware. All right, so now that we've talked about real life in the Orthodox Church and what we ought to be doing, let's take it online. I've compiled a few things to watch out for when you're surfing. And although it's not an exhaustive or infallible list, I think that keeping these questions in the back of your mind while you wade through the world of Orthodox subreddits is a good idea. Okay? So, tip number 1. Does it conform to a specific cultural way of being or understanding? Orthodox Christianity has the dubious honor of being hitched to certain cultural expressions. The first question out of most people's mouths when I tell them I'm an Orthodox priest is, "Oh, like Greek Orthodox?" And you could insert any number of nationalities in there. Are you Ukrainian, Russian, so on, so on. It's a trap, and it's much fallen for, that people who come to the Orthodox Church think they need to assimilate culturally into whatever body they're in. I've seen YouTube videos with speakers who were obviously very North American, introducing themselves as Barsanoufius or Stavros, and most often they're still catechumens. I've unfortunately watched some videos that claim that you can't be Orthodox if you support Ukraine, Russia, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, Western Rite Orthodoxy, the liberals, conservatives, Donald Trump, etc. All of these are cultural, like it or not. The space that you find yourself in needs to be defined by Christ. And if it's not really being the capital C church. A good litmus test is this. The defining feature should be a positive, not a negative. The church is about Christ, not about something else. Yeah? Tip number 2. Is it the most extreme version of something in either direction? As stated above, just because something is the most strict version of that thing does not make that thing the best version of itself. There are many expressions of Orthodox Christianity, not many Orthodox Christianities. People would have you believe that if you step outside of a certain way of being, specific to a very slim margin of people, you have left the church. That is patently untrue. Since God is a God of the living and not the dead, the church is a living thing which grows and supports those that find themselves a part of it. This doesn't necessarily mean wholesale change or even change at all. But it does mean that there is a creative and vital force at work through the Holy Spirit. It also falls the other way too. Some folks tend to think that we need to get with the times and modernize. But this is also really just a worldly impulse. Listen to Father Seraphim Rose when he speaks of the royal path and follow it, straying neither to the right nor to the left. Is it an image thing? This is an interesting one, and this is the one that I'm the most guilty of, so confession time with Father Ryan. Orthodox Christianity, for better or for worse, is a very visually stimulating entity. We have icons, gold-plated furniture, fancy vestments, extreme monastic garb, and the list goes on and on. This appeals to a certain aesthetic. Remember Father Vladimir's ascetic and aesthetic? We're talking about aesthetic, the way that something looks. Before I was a lame, middle-aged dad, I was a discontent youth. I roamed the streets at night. I was in several punk and hardcore bands. I attended rallies and protests, and I considered myself an edgy Christian, to be on the fringes of society. In short, I thought that I was better than everyone else, and my faith was one of the things that made it so. Orthodox Christianity is no different. In fact, because we are so visually distinct, the temptation is worse for me than ever. I leave my house clad in a floor-length black cassock with a huge cross around my neck, and now for some reason I'm growing my hair and my beard. I don't know. I don't know why. Most people think that I'm a monk, or possibly something even more insane. The other day I got asked at the grocery store if I was a wizard. I was so tempted to say yes. And I see lay people, and I see lay people who wear garb that is similar in expression. Just because you put an image of the great schema onto a black hoodie doesn't mean that you embody what that symbol represents. We must be careful that Orthodox Christianity doesn't feed into an image we've created for ourselves. If we use it as a tool of self-satisfaction and demarcation in our societies, we have already lost. We should stand out by our love, goodness, mercy, piety, meekness, and humility, not because our eagle has exactly twice as many heads as a normal one. Since the internet and social media excels at packaging and projecting a certain lifestyle, we must be wary of the ortho-influencer. Not every day is a 3,000 knot day for them, right? Even though they may put that out there. All right. Tip number 4. Does it confirm everything you've ever thought, felt, and understood to be true? I have heard this as a ringing endorsement for Orthodox Christianity, mostly by people who have converted from Protestant and Catholic circles, right? It's confirmed everything I ever knew was true about the world. I hear it all the time and again. And it's meant as a good thing, but it comes across, it rings hollow. And here's why. What if someone comes to the Orthodox Church from a completely pagan death cult? Should the Orthodox Church then reflect what they knew to be true all along? No. Should the Orthodox Church... perhaps the church has value not simply because it confirms, but because it confronts, convicts, challenges, and disarms. Beware of demons parading as angels of light. This story is one of the most common tropes in all of the monastic writings of the fathers. The demons dress up and present themselves to us as whatever we want or need them to be at any moment. Don't fall for slick packaging and shiny new toys. Tip number 5. Does it dabble in the Byzantine, arcane, or fringe? And by Byzantine, I don't mean Eastern. By Byzantine, I mean like strange, protracted, unusual, weird, that kind of thing, okay? This is, in our conspiracy-soaked, information-oversaturated culture, the most pernicious one. In a world of clickbait titles, nothing lands like a crazy headline. As a general rule, if I hear or read anything that starts out with end of the world, second coming, spirit of the age, rapture, prophecy, World War III, or anything about the pandemic, I immediately stop. Immediately. Nothing in this article or video is going to redeem my soul. I can tell you that right now. These sorts of things are good for stirring up the passions and pretty much nothing else. There is a very good reason the church nearly didn't include St. John's Revelation in the canon, and this picture is it. All right, tip number 6, last but not least. Does it embody an uncharitable spirit? Finally, we need to be aware of how people behave on the internet. Everyone has dealt with the now old trope of the internet warrior. This person is mighty behind the keyboard, but in real life they lack the chutzpah that they display online. Something happens to people when they are separated by fiber optics. We say and do things that would never fly in real life. That's the litmus test here. When you read something online and a little red flag goes up in the back of your mind, pay attention. Ask yourself, would it be weird or bad or wrong if someone said this to another person's face? If so, you may have a keyboard warrior on your hands. Beware their righteous zeal. They are a danger to themselves and others. Christianity is honest, very truthful, but above all, it is loving. If it is possible to rephrase something in the interest of being gracious, do it. If it is within your power to make Christ present through your words, thoughts, and actions, do it. And if you encounter someone who isn't interested in these things, pray for them and move on quickly. I once asked the question to my parishioners in Meadow Lake. We were in the kitchen doing the dishes after liturgy one Sunday, and I lamented loudly, wouldn't it be so much easier to be a Christian without the internet? Thinking like, looking around being like, right guys, right? Looking for backup. And the response from my choir director was an absolute gut punch. I bet they felt the same way about computers and the telephone and color photography and books, right? Oof, point taken. It requires relatively little spiritual acumen to moan and gripe about what makes life hard. The real skill in spiritual life is to take those things that make life hard and transform them, or at least let Christ transform them. The internet is no different. May God give us the strength to stand up for the truth, the wisdom to know when we are wrong, and the grace to take it all in stride. If we can do that, we need not worry about the internet, Orthodox or otherwise, because Christ truly will be in our midst. Amen.